Connecting our history to the present. Well, welcome back. As this title would suggest, um, this is going to be a historical treatment, roughly in two sections. And if you look at the bullet points here, ultimately we're going to try to do all four of these. Try to nail down as much as we can about what we know about the Breedemus Golf Course, the original golf course built in 1935. What we know about the Maxwell Golf Course, the golf course built, renovated for the Open in 1940. And then, kind of in another section, what do we have left of either golf course? So that'll be pick up kind of from 1941 to present, and try to look at the history of changes and things like that. And then I would say, kind of as a preview, this bullet point here of how do we put back as much of the historical golf course as possible. That is one we'll get into probably in a separate tutorial and really talk about Gill's work and how it connects to the previous three bullet points and our history. So I guess in general, what I'm trying to do here is something I think very important for a golf course like Colonial. As all of you know, we have a extraordinary history, a unique and extraordinary history in the kind of pantheon of golf, not just in Fort Worth or Texas, but nationwide. There's not that many golf courses out there built in the Depression and that immediately had so much high regard for it, and did the Open in 41 and has the tour event, the longest running tour event on the same site, and the Hogan legacy. And I mean, it's extraordinary. And I think clearly with that comes some sense of responsibility to at least acknowledge that history, be cognizant of it, and understand it, so that as stewards of the golf course, we do it justice. That when we're contemplating work on the golf course, that we keep all this in mind and we honor our history. So, connecting to the historical golf course. Okay, this is our baby picture. The earliest known aerial of Colonial Country Club. Unfortunately, it only shows a small sliver. You have kind of a corner here of the golf course. There's Mockingbird. Here's 15 green. Here's 16 green. Here's 18 green. The putting green, the current clump. 9 green and 6 green with a little bit of one fairway here. So it doesn't show us a whole lot. I would have given anything to see a similar aerial of the entire golf course to kind of confirm some things. But this has been very important because it, along with some written history, Francis Trimble has done a number of really good deep dives into our history. We've put together, I think, a pretty good picture, admittedly with some gaps, of our early golf course history. And so what I'm going to endeavor to do is talk about that and try to distinguish between the 1935 golf course, the 1940 golf course, and kind of what that means. Okay, this little slide section is going to take a while, so you have been warned. You might want to take a bathroom break. We're going to try to unpack the Breedemus Maxwell. I have debate here. I don't know if that's the best phraseology. But there is a narrative, a predominant narrative, historical narrative about the early golf course and how Mr. Leonard got it on the ground, and who did what. And let me focus on that by reading from the Colonial History book, 60 Years of Greatness, a little paragraph that describes, as well as I've ever run across it, and I've run across the same story in a couple different references of how the original routing was put together. So I'm reading now. Marvin Leonard had his eye on a piece of property in southwest Fort Worth near Forest Park and the Texas Christian University campus. He acquired the land, roughly 157 acres, in late 1934, and at once went to work on designing his golf course. Leonard engaged the services of noted golf course architects John Bredemus of Texas and Perry Maxwell of Oklahoma to assist with the layout. Bredemus had been involved with courses all over Texas and in Mexico, and was instrumental in founding the Texas PGA. He had also been experimenting with bentgrass in Texas. Maxwell was finishing up work on the heralded new Southern Hills course in Tulsa. Leonard asked Bredemus and Maxwell each to submit 5 alternative plans for the course. He reviewed their recommendations, then asked for 5 more. Marvin then started picking and choosing elements for his overall plan. He borrowed from both designers to mold the colonial tapestry. Bredemus signed on to oversee the project, assisted by his foreman, Ralph Plummer, who later became a noted architect himself, building Champions Golf Club in Houston and more than 80 courses in all. So that's the history, and to my knowledge, there is not one iota of drawings, of sketches, of descriptions from Mr. Leonard about how anything was borrowed and how the backing and forthing and picking and chooses worked. So I don't know that that's not the way it happened, but the part that's always worried me a bit is the picking and choosing, and then, asking for 5 more routings. It makes it sound like such a casual enterprise where just a couple of guys sketch up some things across a piece of property, and you could move a hole here and move a hole there and combine them and somehow come up with a routing that made sense. If you thought about it just for a moment, let's just imagine that here on, this is 16 green, 17 tee, I think, these two, I think right here, for the hole that's going this way. What if you decided this was a tee best suited for a par 3 that played across this little slough here, and you put your green right here? If that's part of your routing and you decided, that was something you really liked, you've just disrupted. You either have to start playing again over here, 15 green now is a tee and it plays backwards, or you have to change your routing really on the back 9. Probably 3 or 4 holes have to change. If you made this one little change from a tee playing to a green here, it's really hard to unpack a routing and put it back together, to pick and choose. So I don't know that it didn't happen, but I'm going to guess that a routing was seized on kind of early on, and that there was maybe some tinkering that went on, but not a whole lot of picking and choosing and putting routings together. But I don't know that for a fact. But as I indicate here, I believe that the best way to look at this, to not get so confused with this picking and choosing narrative that we don't really know who did what at all. If we focus on what we do know, that John Bredemus was hired to do the work. He was the architect of record for the 1935 golf course, the original routing, and put all the golf course on the ground, except for, as another story goes, which I believe to be true, 15, which the story goes, he wanted to put the green across the creek. Mr. Leonard wanted it in its kind of current location in front of the creek, actually more in front of the creek than is the current green. Maxwell actually moved 15 back some. But anyway, and they had a little dust up about where that green ought to be, and Mr. Leonard was paying for it and building the golf course, and he won, and John Bredemus kind of walked off into the sunset, and Ralph Plummer finished up the last hole or two. So, at any rate, I think we give John Bredemus the lion's share credit for the 1935 golf course because he put it on the ground. However, when Perry Maxwell was brought in by Mr. Leonard to do the work for the Open in 1940, he didn't just do 3, 4, and 5. The property that Mr. Leonard had acquired later, he did do those holes, and we'll talk. And we'll talk about those. But he did much more extensive work. There's probably 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 more greens that were completely rebuilt by Perry Maxwell. Almost all of them could have been regrassed. I think he did most of the tees, most of the bunkers, put some ponds in. This was, in short, very extensive work. And in fact, we know that his associate, Dean Woods, was on property, was hired by the club for about a year to do all that work. And if it was more tinkering or just, again, just doing 3, 4, and 5, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense to actually hire his right-hand man to be on property every day for the work unless it was extensive work. So, in short, I think we do have a Maxwell Bredemus golf course. But I think it is likely more sequential than collaborative. That is, we kind of look at it as 2 golf courses, very similar, but the original routing, however it came to be, even if there was some significant contribution from Maxwell, and we'll never really know, he put it on the ground in 35. And then Maxwell's golf course, really the last one, the later one, the Open golf course, put on the ground with he and Dean Woods, was very extensive. And while it didn't really change much of the routing except for kind of expanding on 3, 4, and 5, it was clearly important architectural work. Well, let's look at the 1937 picture of the Bredemus number 8. Unfortunately, we have kind of one of the coolest areas cut off here, but you can still tell. We'll look in a minute at the Maxwell version. It's very similar, actually, in this case. A number of things. You can see the tee has always, on the original golf hole, pointed, in this case, to the left of the green. Did not line up, so people had to orient themselves to the green. A not uncommon feature of classic golf courses. Has a real interesting kind of turf bench there. I'm assuming this is turf and not a hedge. It's very different looking. Didn't really see that on any other Bredemus holes. So this is kind of just an interesting thing here. for this bunker. And you can kind of tell, or we'll look in a minute, this green was ultimately pushed back a little bit by Maxwell. Okay, the Maxwell version of the same hole. I think fortunately in this case, we have a little bit wider perspective, so we see more of the hole that played over the bend of the Trinity. I think it's also possible that the right-hand side of this green was moved a little bit, kind of more to the right. It definitely was moved back some from the original Breedemist green. We know that from yardage, and we know that from kind of this picture if you look at it carefully. But it's basically the same golf hole. This bunker was kept a very gnarly kind of bunker. You can see it did have a high point here with turf on it in a very irregular shape. This is a common feature of the Maxwell bunkers that were done. They were much more irregular. They had more of these high point turf areas, either as a cape, in some cases as a just a little dot of turf in the middle of the bunker. But you can see kind of, not great, but you can kind of see the irregular shape of the bunker. This bunker is much more irregular than the original Breedemist bunkers, this one, and then this one. So, very similar hole. Tee still oriented the same way. The tee was moved back, the green was moved back and to the right, and the bunkers redone. Number 13. The original Breedemist 13. I had seen this shot before, but I hadn't paid enough attention to know this was 1937 and not the open golf course. And there are some significant differences. I'll try to point them out. Again, the general location is the same as what Maxwell did later, but there's some differences. This is a good kind of, even though you're not on top of it, you can tell the Breedemist design of bunkers was more similar to the shape we have today. More round, kind of ovals, some change in movement, but nothing like the irregularity that we'll see later in the Maxwell bunkers. We'll also look at kind of proof that this green was moved back significantly and then actually came up in elevation a little bit. It looks like they may have just kind of built on top of this green. So for the open, and then all of the bunkers redone, and especially some bunkers put in the front here of this bench. The Maxwell number 8. I'm going to show you a side-by-side here to really make a point here, but I think if you were kind of paying attention, you can tell the differences here. I mean, all this looks the same. The creek looks the same. The trees are the same. Now, there's a tree missing here. I should have pointed that out probably in the previous slide. Well, we'll see it in the side-by-side I have here in a minute, which proves that the green was moved back. You can see that a little bit. If you look at the green edge here, and compare it to the previous one, this bench got much broader. And it got broader, I think, also to be able to put in these significantly kind of gnarly bunkers that weren't in the original. You can also kind of see here how, again, how this bunker is built up a little bit. It's more irregular in shape and has more grass down. It has more grassing that's prominent that you're seeing as a form, whereas the Breedemist bunkers sat more in the ground as ovals. So this green was definitely moved back, significantly went up in elevation, and these, I think the most prominent thing, these very neat, kind of old school, rough looking bunkers with these little grass capes and things put into this bench. Okay, side by side. 1937, 1941. Here's the tree that we mentioned. You can see in 1937 at the back of the green, you can see the same point of reference here to here. So we know this tree here is in this right here. So we have identical scenes kind of at Greenside, except for this tree, which disappears, is taken out, as you can see here. So we know the green was moved back because of that. We can also tell from some frame of references, if you look at the line here and the original kind of creek bank line, and then you do the same thing over here. This is the original creek bank line. That hasn't changed. So if you look at the relationship between this and the green, the breadth of this slope, and then do the same thing over here, you can tell it's much broader. And so this green was moved back and essentially, I think, up a little bit. That's a little harder to tell. But if you look at this bunker here, and the Maxwell green, you can tell this bunker was redone completely. And that in the back of this green, it looks like the back of the green was lifted up as well, compared to this one. You can see just a little bit more covering the background behind. So it looks like this form was here up and back. For sure, this slope got broader. There was a lot more room created between here and here to put in these bunkers. So this, the most dramatic architectural change, these real gnarly kind of cool bunkers with the capes, the grass capes that come down, and they're very irregular shape, and the big kind of gnarly grass parts here and here, as I mentioned before. So the foreground looks, identical, but I think clearly Maxwell for the Open took this green and went up and back and then completely redid the green. We're going to look at 16, Breedemus and Maxwell. These aren't the best ones I have before and after because unfortunately the orientation is slightly different. They're both from the back, but they show us some things that, again, tell us a lot about the two golf courses if you're paying attention. So this is 16 looking back kind of down the left side of the green. One thing you can see is this very goes off the frame here a little bit, but you can tell by the way it comes out here. It's very, again, kind of like our current style, long slopes on bunkers, kind of following the contour of the green, not irregular, gnarly bunkers that Maxwell did. You can see how rough this area is. In fact, it looks like they mowed this down a little bit for the Open. You can see the kind of real Barranca Creek-like thing here, not a pond. You can see, interestingly, kind of some bunkers just set in here into the existing hill. You see a bunker here. I think those disappear in 1941. And unfortunately, you don't see anything over here. I don't think there was a bunker over here. And in the Maxwell picture, you'll see a very prominent bunker on this side emerge. Okay, 16 U.S. Open golf course. You can see from the people. Fairly confident this is an Open picture. It's a little bit hard to see, kind of the changes, but I think there were a significant amount of them. I'm not sure if the green was redone or not. It looks smaller, But I realize it's a slightly different perspective. You know, in the previous picture, if you go back, you could see this tree. So I would say that the previous picture is taken from like this angle, aiming this way. So it doesn't incorporate some of the things on the right side that we can see now. Here's a good example of, I believe, a complete new bunker, and more of that Maxwell style. You can see this kind of grass area here, this irregular grass area, the bunker up a little bit more. Um, this pond, it's a little bit hard to see, but the pond put in, if you look at the one before, you know, again, it's that more slough look to it. There's more elevation change, so this has been flattened out a little bit by putting this pond in. I'm going to guess those bunkers that we had here, and then that one may have been taken up by the pond actually. Don't appear to be there anymore. The green does appear to slope from back to front significantly. Does not appear to have quite the shelf that our current 16 has. Hard to see again. It looks like there's some slope here. But at any rate, the same thing, that we've noted on many of these other things. This is not an identical hole to the original Breedemus hole. There was a number of significant changes made by Maxwell for the Open. I put this in here. We'll try to do a little bit more comparison with the next two, but this is kind of a cool picture. You can see the original 18. I'm not sure what this event is. Certainly an interesting time capsule. Evidently, when people watched golf, they wore suits and hats. Anyway, no bunkers anywhere in sight. You can see the amount of vegetation to the left side. You can't really tell here, but the whole left of 18 is just, again, kind of a slough creek. There is no pond. Okay, we're going to try to do a little comparison here. I have two shots. This is the 1937 shot of 18. Very cool. And I'm going to try to make some tentative comparisons. Again, we don't have a before and after really, but we have as good as we're going to get. So a number of things you can see here. I think this is back. What the photo you're going to see after this is taken probably about right here, much farther up, especially because this green went back. One of the things that's also interesting to me, and I don't know if I'm right here, but I think I might be. I'm almost positive that originally the creek over here on this side that goes along 16, instead of turning and making a hard, left as it does to go between 17 and 18, I think the original watershed went across here. And I think this is where it crossed. It's about the right spot. You can kind of see a bank built up here and obviously a big pecan. This is the big pecan that we unfortunately lost a couple of years ago, that was on the right side of, the left side of the scoreboard, that blew down in a storm. This is another big pecan that I think probably 15 years ago, maybe fell down as well. So I think this is where the original watershed came through and then turned this way to go up the left side of 18. But at any rate, you can see the fairway here, very broad. You can also see some rolls here. That'll be important later when we kind of see what one of the changes Gil would like to make to kind of recapture some of this. This fairway clearly moves a little bit more than it does now. So other little points, you can see the front of the green here and where it is in relation to things like this tree. Again, hard to tell for sure. The depth is not definitive. But one of the things I'm going to look at in the next one, you can see a clump here of three cedar elms, small cedar elms. This appears to be behind this green, or maybe right at the back edge, somewhere in like that. If you'll also note kind of where the clubhouse is, it appears to be clearly behind this green significantly. Okay, let's look at the Maxwell version. All right, the Maxwell version, again, taken clearly up from that frame of reference considerably. You can see the different angle of the clubhouse, how much more you see. So I'm not suggesting this is the same, but you know, if you piece it together, you can tell, I think this is that clump of 3 cedar elms that was behind the green. It is now in front of the green. You can obviously see the bunkers that were put in. There were no bunkers before. You see kind of the shape of the bunkers, a more irregular shape. Bunkers kind of stacked a little bit more with some little capes here. So if you piece it together, I think it's very clear. And I mentioned that aerial of 1937, one of the first ones I showed, where you could also tell definitively that this green was moved back considerably, redone completely. That again, we have more work. We have a lot of work done by Maxwell for the Open. Okay, I wanted to show you this little introductory thing for the Open. It's kind of neat, and make a couple of observations. Here it discusses Dean Woods and Perry Maxwell and their involvement in it. I think the biggest thing I'd like to point out, this is another clue that helped confirm to me that a lot more work was done than just the 3 holes. It says 3 holes, new holes, have been constructed. Others have been lengthened throughout the rebuilding of both tees and greens. So it doesn't say which ones. It might lead you to believe that they were all redone. It's not, you know, clear. And again, I'm not certain that all of the greens weren't regrassed. I mean, even if there was some that they kept exactly as it was, I don't know the state of the greens, if they wanted them all the same, if they, you know, had a different kind of grass, bent grass. Anyway, there's so much we don't know, but we do have confirmation here, certainly, that there were more greens done than the 3 new holes. And then the other thing that has been very important, and I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to this, frankly, until a little bit ago. Picture here of Colonial staff. So it has Bob Burns, R.M. Alexander Jr., greenskeeper, a fine-looking man, as usual. Mr. Nottingham in the center, the assistant professional, and then this guy right here, Dean Woods, golf course engineer. So, you know, under Colonial staff, if you put Dean Woods there, it seems clear to me that the implication of that, and there was some hint in some of the history that they hired Dean Woods for about a year to essentially supervise the entirety of the Open renovation. This would again suggest to me the significance of the work, and that it was ongoing enough that Colonial essentially hired him from Mr. Maxwell over an extended period of time. So again, nothing definitive, but a lot of little clues to suggest that the Open renovation was extensive. This is something I'm not going to do a tremendous amount with as far as diagnostic stuff, but it's got a few little interesting things on it, and it's just kind of neat. So this is the aerial, again, taken from a plane, so you have the angle. It's not sitting on top like some, you know, current satellite technology gives us. But this is the kind of outline of holes, and it does show us a couple of things I'm just going to kind of make note of that help confirm for me. I'll start over here. This is the best shot of the U.S. Open tee for 16 that I've mentioned. It's pushed all the way back in this corner of Mockingbird and Colonial Parkway on the other side of the creek. You can see the creek here. So I think this was one of the few examples, really, maybe a TN14 that later returned to here for members. But the ponds, the enlargement of the slough here on 16 is observable. The lake was still present between 11 and 12. Can't really see it, but the expansion of the pond here on 9. The expansion of the slough into a pond lake on 18. So the you can see some of these little dots in bunkers, like this one right here, some grass, the irregular bunker style put in here, all of these redone. So again, you just spend some time looking at these various pieces, and you find one little thing here and there that gives you some confidence that you know what's going on, and you know more about the changes between the Breedemus Golf Course and the Maxwell Golf Course. Okay, I'm going to use these two maps for a particular purpose. So let me say right off the bat, I'm not going to try to use them to clearly pinpoint, architectural changes. These are clearly hand drawings. So, the shape of a green, the exact shape of a bunker, the relationship of green to bunker and tees and things like that. We know those aren't perfect representations, but they do tell us something. I mean, the people that drew these weren't just kind of scribbling. They were trying kind of their darndest to get things sort of right. So we'll go through this briefly to just kind of talk about the architectural differences, additions and subtractions. Later on, I'll try to talk about, on a scale drawing, more specific changes that Maxwell did for the Open. But let's use these two because it's kind of interesting. First thing that's obvious, the scale is about the same. You can see kind of the outline of the Trinity and the scale of that, and the golf course. It's virtually the same scale, so that's great. So one of the things that we've talked about before, but I think is also amplified here, if you look at the bunkers and the shape of the bunkers, the general location and shape of the bunkers, the Breedemus Golf Course has much more oval bunkers, much more kind of clearly outlined areas here. And the Maxwell bunkers, you can see where there's been subtractions and additions, and a much different form in all cases. Much more irregular, much more capes, much more kind of turf. There's these little islands that you see drawn on bunkers that we see in pictures. So there is no question that I think every single bunker was redone by Maxwell for the Open, even ones that stayed in kind of roughly the same spot. They look different, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There may be in a couple of the Breedemus bunkers that they decided were just fine. I'm not suggesting that, but there was an extensive amount of bunker work, and I'm going to say we might as well look at it as if they redid all the bunkers. Let's go through just a few. You can see here on number 1, we have a large free-formed bunker with a cape and a little island of grass there on number 1 fairway. It was a free-form bunker there. There was a bunker here on the right side of 1 that's gone, never to return. On 2, Maxwell added a bunker here. There was no bunkering on 2 at all before. These 3 here, Breedemus bunkers, were turned into one large, again, gnarly free-form bunker here, and a bunker here added to probably cut off the corner. We'll talk about 3, 4, and 5 a little bit later, the changes there, so I'll skip those for now. If you look at number 6, you have this little bunker here that looks like the same kind of bunker here, so maybe that wouldn't change much except for the shape. This bunker looks relatively same as this bunker, but this bunker farther down was added, It's another similar thing. I mean, it's a little bit like what we did in 2008. Even then, I think there was an attempt to get some of these bunkers farther down the golf course to be more hazardous for the Open. So Maxwell was adding bunkers and he was pushing them down the golf course a little bit, sometimes both. There was a little bunker here on 6 that disappeared, right here. 7, there was a lake in this little dead spot here that went away, just got grassed over. Some of the bunkering changed too. This bunker looks like almost the same bunker here, but there's more. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 fairway bunkers here on 7 that Maxwell added. 9 was considerably changed. We have 2 bunkers on the right side here. Turns into 1 on the right, a bigger, again, gnarlier bunker on the right instead of 2, and then 1 down the golf course a little bit more to be hazardous. You can also see that this creek, which right here, just kind of the big slough that went along the right side of 9, turns into this little node here, more of a pond look for the Open, to again make it, I guess, much more hazardous to hit into the green. Same thing while they were doing this work. I think they expanded the pond on 18. Right here again, it's kind of a slough or a creek, because we've talked about this before. There's a lake here that's drawn that was clearly there with the Breedemus Golf Course. It's not drawn here, interestingly enough, but it is on the picture before here for the Open. So I think that's just something they missed here on the drawing. I think the lake was still here. Now, again, I think it was taken out in the 40s fairly soon after the Open. 12, same thing. You can see there's no fairway bunkering at all on 12. 2 big free-form bunkers put in on the right and left here on 12. 14, you can kind of see again, not a lot of changes there. 15, this 1 single bunker here at the corner turned into a complex of 3, and this big bunker added, so much more like our current bunkering. And as we talked about before, the screen was moved back. 16, there's really no bunkers shown here, maybe a little one here in the back. So we've got this bunker that I showed you in the picture, and clearly a much bigger bunker set in right here on 16. 17 gets a fairway bunker on the left side that did not have one at all, and 18 gets all the changes we've talked about as well. So this is interesting to again just kind of look at the extent, the scope of changes made by Maxwell for the Open. The next one we're going to look at is a little bit more, because it's on an actual scaled area of the golf course. We're going to look at how we got this distance. If before I leave this, you can see the farthest you could play the golf course on the Breedemus Golf Course was 64.30, and the Open yardage is 70.35. So one of the things that was always a mystery to me was how you got so much more yardage out of it, and we'll look at that and try to define some of those yardage increases on the next slide. All right, let's try to get a little bit more definitive, and I've put on this 1952 aerial, the first satellite aerial that we have. So it's shooting right down on the golf course, and then what we have we have similar aerials shot at exactly the same location that we can compare to later for different purposes. But this is still essentially the Open golf course. If you look at it carefully, the bunkering's the same. The greens are smaller, but they're kind of in the same locations. Until 1956, when Dick Wilson did the first, I think, really extensive renovation of the golf course in many areas. I don't think really anything of any note was done It does not appear anyway to the golf course. So this aerial should serve our interests very well. I'm going to primarily focus on just hole by hole. And you can see I've got anything that's in green is the original golf course, the 1936 golf course in green. And then I have in orange the open golf course. And so we'll talk about how greens were moved and how we basically picked up 600 yards, the old yardage and the new. How did we get 600 yards for the open? So let's just go through it. Number one, no change. Again, I'm not sure the green wasn't redone. I can make a pretty good case that it was. I know all the bunkers were, but distance-wise, it didn't change anything. Number two, picked up 30 yards. I think this is exclusively just moving the tee back into the woods more. We've noted before, a bunker was added here from the Breedemans Golf Course. The green location relatively made the same. Number three, picked up 30 yards. I think this is primarily, if not exclusively, for moving the green. I think the tee stayed exactly the same location. Again, this bunker put in, if you recall, there for the open, there was a bunker here that evidently was removed. And then I have the location of the original green and then where it was moved to for the open and where it currently sits. One interesting thing, this bunker here, they left until I think Dick Wilson's work in '56. Used to be a greenside bunker. When they moved the green back, they left this bunker as a kind of a little intermediate bunker for whatever reason. So green goes back 30 yards, a small bunker put in here. You can see here where the old 4, where you picked up, again, 100 yards. That's because it used to be a little hole that played interior here. There was a little pond set in here. And then here's the current 4 and the open 4. I think you can also see where the property that Mr. Leonard acquired. This is an old tree line. I think this straight line right here. I believe this then would be the property he acquired. This being kind of the boundary of the Breedemans Golf Course. So you have 4 here and then 5 played on this side of the tree line to a green that was much shorter right here. So that's how we picked up 100 yards, 367 to 469 for 5. It goes outside, other side of the tree line, along the Trinity, tee way back, green farther into the trees a little bit here. 6, no change in yardage. 7, no change. 8 picks up, 40 yards. I think this is a combination of tees going back about 20 and green going back about 20. Here's the original green location generally and kind of the new. We just shoved back and maybe even a little right from the first green, the original green. Number 9, no change in distance. Number 10, picked up 15 yards or so. I think that's exclusively the tee. I think the green stayed in the exact same location. 11, no change. 12, no change. 13, picked up 15 yards. I think that is exclusively green moving back, or mainly green moving back. Now, they did have a different tee where they could play 2 tees for the open. And they may have, but again, this tee, which was, I think, originally a tee that could be played for 13, was the open tee for 14. So I think you remember me showing you that on the map before. This being the original tee for 14. So that's how you get 70 yards plus out of 14, moving the tee way back. I don't think the green had anywhere to go, so I think the green relatively the same location. 1590 yards. So it's another reason why we know this green went back. We could also see it from that original aerial that the green went back. Original location, new location. T also goes back. I also have here for 16 the original location of the T, which is very similar to where we have it today. And then again, one of the few examples of an open T went on the other side of the creek for the open, giving you 207 in yardage. 17 picked up 50 yards. It's one reason why I know if you look at the location of the original T in the program and then you look at the T here, there's just no way to get 50 yards unless the green also moved back some. So I'm going to suggest that green was moved back 20, 25 yards and redone by Maxwell. And then 18, the T was moved back a little bit, but I think primarily this 30 yards, 35 yards is from the green moving back from the original location to this location. So here's kind of a review of what we know the Maxwell changes were. I think all the bunkers, new greens, 8, 13, 15, 18, perhaps 17, perhaps 1. 4, 3, 4, and 5, which we kind of already knew. And then many, many T's, lengthened and redone. So extensive work. Okay, I'm going to use kind of the last little vehicle we have for getting insight into the, in this case, the Maxwell golf course. And that is this wonderful resource we have. We have pictures of all 18 greens kind of from the approach or somewhere in front for the U.S. Open program. And until we ran across this, I don't know that we had any great sense. There's some of these are pictures that we had before, but many of them are not. Many of them we don't have any separate pictures of at all anymore that I know of. So you can't see, the resolution is not great, but I think it's good enough to get a real sense of what we're talking about here. So this is number 1. You can see shot from the approach. I think the left side of the approach, not directly in the approach, but kind of from the left. And there's a number of things that's very interesting and important about the picture. You can see, how much more the green sets on the ground than our current greens. Our current greens are much more kind of raised in the air. I think this has happened over time with redoing greens and redoing greens and redoing greens. The natural tendency is to get a little bit more perched. These greens clearly were set more into the ground a little bit. You can see the bunker style that we've talked about before with Maxwell. This is a kind of a bunker that moves a little bit and actually had a grass island in the back. You can see this is a bunker that moves and has a little bit of a cape here and a little bit of a grass hump here. So, and then the other thing that I think is interesting and instructive, and it's one reason why I think this might be a Maxwell green. Number 1, we don't know that it's not. We know the yardage didn't change, but we don't know that this green wasn't changed. And if you look at the shape of this green, this is a much different shape than the picture. I should have pointed that out, but if you look at the map we had of the Breedemans Golf Course, it was basically an oval. And this is such not an oval, such a triangular shape. It makes me wonder a lot about whether this green may have been changed, just put kind of in the same place, but enlarged and reshaped. The other reason why I think it might be a Maxwell green, or was a Maxwell green, was this description here. It says, the carpet slopes sharply from right to left and from back to front, and players are certain to be confronted with tricky side hill putts. One of the architectural features of many Maxwell greens are that they move a lot, that they have rolls, so to speak. They're often pitched to the land, that is, fit into the land. Whatever way the land's going, the green is set that way. And I think this is kind of an example of that. If you think about number 1, the area on the right is much higher than the area on the left. The natural grade is clearly sloping to the left. So this green was sloping sharply to the left and back to front as well. You can kind of see that here. This is the back, this is the front. So you can really tell this green had some movement to it. So we'll look at a few other program pictures, not all of them, but we'll look at many of the other Maxwell greens, the ones we know he did. And one of the common features is going to be that the description of the green, unlike some of the other ones, talks about sloping or sharply breaking greens. Okay, here's a picture number 3. Again, resolution not great. We know this is a new green because 3, 4, and 5 were completely moved. This was moved back considerably. And what's interesting about 3, 4, and 5, the ones he completely redid, you know, he only added one fairly nondescript bunker, this front bunker right here, to those 3 holes. 4 had no bunkers, 5 had no bunkers. It's kind of an interesting architectural choice there. There's also no mention on 3 of sharply sloping green or anything like that. So I'm going to guess that this green was not sharply sloping in any real defined way. But one thing you do see is how much more, again, kind of in the ground this green was. Not perched up quite as much, but just more in the natural terrain. Okay, number 4, it talks about the size of the green. You can see that this is, again, following kind of the natural terrain. It does come up from the approach significantly, but not as much as the current green does. Decided to, you know, just kind of have this big, broad green and the surrounds around it without any trapping at all. The description here talks about a gentle gully in front. I'd say we currently have that, maybe much more so of one. The green itself is entirely without traps, but since it is the largest on the course, so it is a simple matter to get putts of 50 feet or more. Putting will tell the story on this one. So no reference to slopes. You can definitely see that it's back to front. You can definitely see kind of a little ridge right here, I think, in the middle of some kind. But we don't have a great deal of insight as to the putting surface itself, other than it was very broad and large, and that, again, it didn't have any traps and was set down on the ground more. Okay, here is number 5. Boy, and you talk about set in the ground. This one is really set in the ground. But again, no traps. And if you look at the description here, it does talk a little bit about the putting green slopes. It suggests a great deal of slope on it, or at least by today's standards. It says the second shot must be carefully guarded to prevent hook or slice. There are no traps, but the large waving green calls for perfect putting. So large waving green, again, not a tremendous amount, but I think waving certainly suggests a green that is moving in a couple of different directions. Okay, we have 8 here. You've seen this picture before, so this is just the same one that I used to describe the kind of the before and after of the Breeding Miss versus the Maxwell golf course. So if you look at the description, though, it says the target from 200 yards is very small. I don't think it means that the green is very small. But it clearly is not one of the bigger greens, because it says the small carpet is heavily protected on all sides by traps, which is kind of easy to see. Making it advisable to come in from the right to left. So again, it's interesting that it's suggesting, because of the trap, and probably this large trap on the left, that in some ways it's asking you to come in from this side and turn it this way, which obviously puts you more in peril from carrying this large chasm here. It says the green is sharply rolling and offers many varieties of, quote, breaks, unquote, even on the same putt. That would suggest that 8 was moving a lot. If you're talking about a variety of breaks on the same putt, certainly suggests a green in the middle that moves a lot because you may get, again, a double breaker. And that's typically not a shelf or a slope that moves in one direction that pitches the green. It's typically movement in the green. So again, nothing definitive, but it suggests a smaller, sharply breaking green, the original Maxwell green. Again, we've seen this before. This is 13. Seen this picture when I was comparing 13 to the Breedemans 13. If you look at the description, it says absolute accuracy is required with long iron or light wood, and judgment and club selection can play a big part. So clearly, the U.S. Open tee, which made it a much longer hole, was important here. 192 is what they say, have the yardage at here in this description. It's an interesting kind of amoeba-shaped green. Now, again, this is the only thing we have that makes it look like that. It certainly was not what the Breedemans green looked like. So it gives us a little bit of insight. It looks like, the green moved shape-wise a lot. And it also said this, deep traps completely surround the green, which is large and rolling, offering ample opportunity for 3-putting. So, again, this is certainly not the kind of description you'd like, but it tells us this was a green that was rolling and that had some movement to it. '15, recall we kind of confirmed that this green was moved. It's a really neat shot. One of the other things you can see here is how the this low here that kind of goes sharply from right to left has been planed out over the years. There's some clearly some features in the fairway that we don't have anymore. What we have is more of a low right in front as this green has gotten higher. Like the other greens, it sets more in the ground, certainly, than our current 15 does. You can kind of see most of the green, so I think it's clearly sloping from the back to the front. You have this really free-form bunker. Here's a great example of a bunker moving every which way, has a little grass island in it. So again, very much different bunker style than the Breedemans bunker style. And then if you look at the description here, right side is dangerous with sand and boundary fence. Small ravine with water curls around left. And backside of carpet, steep sloping green offers sharp breaks, difficult long putts both up and down. So again, the greens that we know that Maxwell touched up, clearly almost all of them, 3 may being the one exception that doesn't mention it, mention slopes and movement that in some sense I think you can see the back to front for sure. It also looks a little bit like it goes from right to left, but in some ways we don't know, but we do know it was moving a lot. And finally, 18, another picture you've seen before. Again, if you recall, the Breedemans picture was much farther back, had a green without bunkers. And again, you can tell this green set in the ground much more than the current 18 does, much lower in the profile. But if you look here, the description, it says near the green, which is festooned with traps on the right. The quote-unquote break is sharply towards the left in the direction of the lake, which runs from 100 yards out all along the left side of the carpet. The green itself is one of the largest and most difficult on the course. So without knowing a whole lot, we know it moved sharply from right to left, and we know it was fairly large, and that there was a great deal of break. And I guess most difficult certainly suggests some rolls and some challenges to the putting surface. So what does all this mean? Well, again, all we have are pieces. All we have are little puzzle pieces we're trying to fit in and make a picture. But if you combine pictures, program, few aerials we have, and what we know, it does appear that the greens that Maxwell did do, almost all of them have some form, at least for the time, of what you call sharply rolling or at least challenging greens with respect to movement. And if you think about the greens currently, as we're describing, really, we don't have a whole lot of that in them. And I'm not suggesting that you'd even think about going to the grades that we probably had. If we had the grades, then it would be great if we did, of these original greens. I think you'd look at them and go, well, you can't pin, half of that surface with today's putting speeds. So that's not the point. But if you're looking at stylistically, things, and you want to know as much about the old golf courses, how they were different, how Maxwell changed the original Breedemans golf course, with the intent of at least trying to get as much back to the old golf course, or in Gil's, I guess, sense, trying to pay attention to or honor or start from the old golf courses as a reference point to what we need to do. All of these put together are a great resource, and I think we know a lot more about the old golf courses than we used to. And again, to sum up the point that I think I'm very comfortable in making, I think we have two historic golf courses. We had the 35 Breedemans golf course with its characteristics, and we have the 40-41 golf course for the Open, the Maxwell golf course. And while there wasn't any rerouting done except for 3, 4, and 5, and even that was fairly similar to the old holes, there was so much work done, greens and tees and all the bunkers, that it's a significant impact to the golf course. I think we have a Breedemans Maxwell golf course, but we have one that's much more sequential than we do this notion that maybe they collaborated initially, and then Maxwell's influence was limited to that. Clearly, that's not the case. The greatest influence of Perry Maxwell is in the Open golf course. Okay, back where we started, finding the historical golf courses. These are the same bullet points I put up on the first slide. I will quickly review. What do we know about the Breedemans golf course? Well, we had some pictures. And I think the narrative that I'm convinced is the closest we have to the true history would be that the routing of the original golf course, since we don't know for sure who had input architecturally, kind of as far as the routing goes, we know John Breedemans put it on the ground. We know John Breedemans was here to build the golf course on the ground. So for that reason, primarily, even if there was some early input from Maxwell or others or whatever, however Mr. Leonard sorted through the routing, John Breedemans put it on the ground. I think the routing of the golf course is his, except for 3, 4, and 5. What do we know about the Maxwell golf course? Well, we know that the renovation that he and Mr. Woods did for the Open was extensive. And we have noted the number of changes to probably all the bunkers, 6, 7, 8 greens, The new greens 3, 4, and 5, tees, ponds, a real treatment of the Open, much like we do today. Moving bunkers to make them more hazardous, moving them down the golf course a little bit, moving tees back, changing greens. Even even in 1940, there was a real attempt to make sure that for the U.S. Open, the golf course was as challenging as it could be. What do we have left of either golf course? Well, we didn't talk a whole lot about that, and honestly, this is the next tutorial to come. We're going to kind of pick up from the mid-40s and try to follow it through kind of the present and talk about renovations and who's been on the golf course and how things have changed. Spoiler alert, the answer is we have the same routing as the Open golf course, except for 8, which had to change, and except for 13, which changed a little bit and then changed back. But we don't have much at all left of the Maxwell Open greens and complexes. And then the fourth bullet point, probably another tutorial to come when we talk about Gil Hanse's work and start looking at that specifically. How do we put back as much of the historical golf course as possible? Well, again, I will tell you that this is what Gil is doing. He is starting from the historical golf courses, and he is in fact trying to consciously and directly put architecturally back in as much as possible the historical golf courses. So you have that to look forward to. So again, thanks very much for listening, paying attention to this. Hopefully this was useful to you, and there is more to come.